Good morning, everyone. I hope that you can see my screen. Welcome to the September meeting of the Valley of the Sun Deconstruction and Reuse Work Group. We hope that you had a pleasant summer, and we're glad to have you back with us as we launch our new season of meetings. We have 3 topics of focus today and 3 guest presenters. First, Chris Magwood and Tracy Huynh of RMI are going to be sharing information about ResNet 1550, which is an in-the-works standard to provide a consistent methodology for the calculation and reporting of the embodied carbon of dwelling units. This is something that they've talked a little bit about in earlier meetings, and so this is a continuing story with progress. Second, Brad Guy, who's an AIA architect and the program manager for the Build Reuse organization's Environmental Product Declarations Initiative, is going to provide an update on the program, and we'll hear from some of the participating organizations, the first cohort implementing these. This is also a follow-up from our January 24 session, and it's focused on the program rollout. So again, there's a little bit of history as well as continuing momentum. After Brad talks about the EPD initiative, he'll switch gears and he'll share results from the 2024 National Association of Home Builders Salvage and Reuse Survey. So we have a lot of content to go through, and we're thrilled to have folks here for the session. But before we turn things over to Chris and to Tracy to begin, and as everybody arrives and gets settled, we'll set just a little bit of context. So, who or what is the Valley of the Sun Deconstruction Reuse Work Group? If our logo and our images don't give it away, we're based in the Phoenix, Arizona area. We spotlight deconstruction, reuse, and sustainability progress plans and goals as models for broader consideration and implementation. We welcome participants regardless of where you are. And we invite you to join us on LinkedIn to share or promote your deconstruction, reuse, and sustainability efforts. I'll put the link for that in the chat in just a few minutes. You can also email us for suggestions or questions for meetings, or if you'd like to present, and I'll put that address in as well. The meetings are sponsored by Stardust, which is a nonprofit in the Phoenix area for 28 years now, I think, starving the landfill and making quality used building materials available for reuse in the community through 2 retail centers. And I will put the link for Stardust in. Now, previews of coming attractions. Next month, Rhiannon Moore and Joe Siemens of the City of Victoria, British Columbia, will share about Victoria's very innovative and successful demolition waste and deconstruction bylaw, which actually established a significant fee for demolition permits that could be refunded if targeted wood salvage rates were achieved or if the structure was relocated. That's a really innovative approach. They're finding it helpful, but it gets into this whole question of incentives versus pressures, carrots versus sticks, and so we're really looking forward to that one. In our November meeting, Olivia Cashman of Hennepin County, Minnesota, is going to be talking with us about Hennepin County's Project Manager's Guide to Material Reuse in Commercial Buildings. So we've got some very fun topics lined up for the next few months. But let's learn a little bit about more about our participants. As we are a community, it really is helpful to get to know each other, to connect with each other. So we invite you to share your name, your organization, your location in the chat. You may discover someone else that you want to have a conversation with or a connection later, and we will share the Zoom chat afterwards along with the recording link. Now, as you do that, we are going to run a few polls to learn who's with us today and also to get a little baseline information about people's familiarity with the topics that we've got on today's agenda. So, first slide, first poll question, and Lauren, if you can go ahead and launch the poll, please. We want to know where you're joining us from. And so it becomes a question of what region or geography best describes the area that you represent. And we realize this is a pick one. We do have all the areas of the United States. Sometimes we're fortunate enough to get participants from outside the US, but we like to know who's attending the different sessions. So, Lauren, I'll turn it over to you as you're collecting results, and perhaps you can tell us any headlines from that.
Yeah, looks like we have just about everyone who's been responding so far. Thank you. And it looks like the current lead we have is we have a lot of people joining us from the West region.
Okay, super. And have you shown, and are we ready to move on to the next one?
And then there's the results for everybody. So you can take a look and see.
Okay. So that was a single choice. I'll move on to the next one, where we'd like to have an understanding of what the backgrounds are of the folks or what organizations and types of organizations you are representing. And this one, select anything and everything that applies because we realize that many of you wear multiple hats.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Looks like our current leads, we have a lot of people here from the nonprofit sector, but we also have a good amount from government as well. And feel free to take a look.
Okay. Super. We'll move on to the next one. Now, I mentioned that these two topics.
You say I have.
I think we have some background noise. If someone can go ahead and mute yourself, that would be super, please. Okay. And if not, Lauren, perhaps you can help because I don't have the participants up list at present. Okay. I mentioned that we have two topics that we've discussed to some degree before, and so it will be helpful for our presenters to know where folks are on the continuum of awareness and familiarity with these. So this is our poll question about embodied carbon measurement, pardon me. So how familiar are you with this? This will help Chris and Tracy as they're explaining to know just how much detail to go into. We'll give it another moment or two.
Yes, thank you, everybody, for participating. I'm going to go ahead and share this with everybody. Looks like most of us are very active so far, so that's really cool to see.
But the great news is that we have some folks where this is not even on the radar screen or where it's a new concept. So this is a chance for us to start to share and provide information to folks and add it to their repertoire. So that's wonderful. Thank you, everybody. The fourth and last of our polls is about environmental product declarations, or EPDs. And this is a chance to please share with us how familiar you are with this. As we said, it's an established initiative, and Brad is giving us his second actually a second presentation. This is an update, but we hope we are bringing the news to some folks who may not have had it on their radar screens before. And I think if I'm seeing the results of the poll as they play, we do have some folks for whom this is a new topic, which is wonderful. That's part of the intent of the sessions. Okay. Lauren, let me know when you've had a chance to get results and show people what they look like, and then we'll move on.
And sharing the results now. Thank you, everybody, for participating in our polls today.
Are we ready to move on? Okay.
I think so.
Okay, then. So, bit of ground rules for the meeting. The recording and the Zoom chat will be provided to registrants afterwards, as we mentioned. We do have a question and answer and discussion time planned after the prepared materials. So we know you'll have some comments and questions along the way. We ask you, please go ahead and put those in the chat as folks are presenting, and we'll come back to those when we open things up, and that way we won't lose track of anything. As much as possible, we would like to leave you with local control of your microphones and cameras, so please pay attention to background noise to help us keep things moving. Also, at the end of the meeting, there will be a very brief survey to help us continue to improve our meetings. So we hope that you'll take a moment when we end and that you will respond to that. So now finally on to our presenters. First, we'll be talking about the ResNet 1550 standard, then the Build, Reuse, EPD initiative and the salvage and reuse survey results. So I'm going to turn this over first to Chris Magwood and Tracy Huynh, and then they will turn it over to Brad for the next section as we go through. So Tracy, please go ahead and present. If you have not already started, your screen should trump mine, and then we will be in business. Super. Tracy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kathy. And I'll actually pass the floor on to Chris to kick us off on the ResNet 1550 standard.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kathy, and your whole team and everybody who's here today. It's great to be joining you all. Tracy and I are going to sort of tag team on this short presentation. We were on the Valley of the Sun webinar last year talking about the sort of the early phase of this standard. The standard is a ResNet standard. So for those of you in the home construction industry, ResNet oversees the HERS rating program. So they have the HERS rating for energy efficiency, the HERS carbon index for operational emissions, and the HERS water index as well for water efficiency. And so with that organization, Tracy and I were on the group that led the development of this standard, which is for calculating and measuring and reporting and verifying the embodied carbon of residential buildings. So it was, I guess, okay, we'll start with Home Builders Can. We're here representing Home Builders Can, which is a program of RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute. And Home Builders Can is a community of practice for home builders and energy raters, basically to increase awareness of embodied carbon, increase builders' performance on embodied carbon, and to adopt and scale profitable climate-smart building practices. So we work with a lot of home builders and HERS raters to bring this issue to light and then help people be able to develop strategies to reduce their embodied carbon. So I have said the term embodied carbon, I think, about half a dozen times already. So it was great to see in the in those introductory polls that there are folks here for whom this is kind of a new topic. So we'll start just with a really quick explainer about embodied carbon. Essentially, it's the emissions that occur over the lifespan of a product, or when you put a bunch of products together in a building, that whole building. So this is the emissions that happen when you make a product, when you transport a product, when you install a product, when you fix or repair or replace a product, and eventually, dismantle or reuse or whatever happens to that product at the end of its life. It's sort of the accumulation of all those emissions. In this standard, what we do. Oh, sorry. Can you go back one, Tracy? So I'd say what we do in the standard is basically, the formula you see here on the screen. We take the material, the quantity of the material that's in the building, we multiply it by a global warming emission factor, and that gives us the amount of emissions associated with a particular material. Then you sum up the emissions of all those materials and you get the total for a whole building. So that's sort of the math behind it and the sort of the theory of how you sort of get an embodied carbon measurement for a building. So why a focus on embodied carbon? It's a bit of a hidden source of emissions. We don't often stop to think about what emissions happened in sort of putting together all the products we use, especially when it comes to buildings, which use a lot of material. And so it's important because it represents a huge pool of emissions. So in the US, some of the work that Tracy and I have done to quantify this shows that the emissions that happen from just making the building products that go into our new homes is a burst of emissions about the size of entire countries. So you can see there both Denmark, Bahrain, and Ireland they have the emissions of their entire economies are equivalent to the emissions of just making the materials that go into new homes in the US in a year. So it's a really substantial pool of emissions, hence our sort of interest and desire to be able to first just start acknowledging it and then measure it and then reduce it. So the ResNet 1550 standard is a way to try to bring a common framework to the home building industry for quantifying, verifying, and reporting these embodied carbon emissions. I talked a few minutes ago about the sort of the full life cycle of products. You can sort of see that broken up here in this graphic. The ResNet 1550 standard is in its first version anyway, the one that's out for public comment right now, is focusing just on the product stage. So you can see in that sort of blue-green dashed outline that what we're focused on initially is the product stage emissions. So that's the emissions that come from getting raw materials to make a product, getting those raw materials to a factory, and then all the emissions associated with manufacturing that product. And so that's the focus of this stage of the ResNet 1550 standard. And then how is it relevant to used materials? This is where I'm going to hand it off to Tracy, and she's going to take you through what this means and how the 1550 standard works with reused stuff.
Thanks, Chris. So some of you might be wondering, why does this matter to me? And with this group of experts dedicated to accelerating the value and use of salvaged building materials, the standard might be very interesting for that purpose. As Chris described before, builders are who would be looking to reduce their embodied carbon have two main choices. If you think back to that equation, you can either use less material or you can use lower carbon material. And reused products are very attractive for that purpose because with deconstructing, regrading, storing, and reprocessing materials for reuse typically has a significantly lower carbon footprint than manufacturing a new equivalent material. So for this first iteration of the standard, reused products are given a bit of a freebie. So basically a 100% discount on the emissions compared to using new materials. So this factor here, global warming emissions factor, is essentially 0 to be assumed in this first iteration. And the technical group that we worked with to develop the standard settled on this approach since it was a common approach to other initiatives at the time that we were developing this first draft of the standard. And our intent overall is to make reused materials more attractive for builders and to accelerate the demand for reuse. So there's a number of local government guidelines and embodied carbon analysis softwares and so that had approaches to give reused materials a 0 carbon emissions factor. And there were some that had a bit of a margin above that, so 20% of an equivalent new materials emissions factor. We use this as a basis to develop the approach for this iteration of the standard. But for future iterations, we aim to align the data sourcing of a reused products emissions factor with other materials as well. Of course, that would require ideally environmental product declarations or EPDs for reused materials, which Brad will speak to in more detail later. Realistically, it'll take a while for EPDs to be created and published, so it's more likely that we develop default values differentiated by material category. So that's actually another reason why we settled on this 100% discount approach, because there was limited defensible data to develop more specific factors. And it was a pretty important sticking point for developing the standard that we base our recommendations on defensible data and also the longevity of the use of the standard. Longevity in the sense of not having to change all the factors, all the numbers, all the calculation processes all the time, so that builders keep and users of the standard keep needing to change their calculation process. So it's not a perfect approach, but like a common saying in our group was that we didn't want to let perfection stand in the way of progress. So we are going with this approach for the first iteration and are interested to see how it evolves in next versions. But we're pretty hopeful. So there's a lot of initiatives in the past few years actually that show the growing momentum on reuse, not only on the local level, but also in the structural engineering profession, even up to the point of construction standard bodies like BRICS in the UK. So we think there's going to be a lot more data available. It's going to be more in conversations about embodied carbon reduction and building decarbonization generally. And we are excited to see where this takes us with the next version of the standard. And I just wanted to end on one exciting piece of news that the standard is now open for a second round of public comments. So if you want to shape how embodied carbon is measured and reported for residential buildings, I encourage you to review the standard and leave comments. I can copy and paste this link into the chat, so it's easily clickable for everybody. But with that, I will turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, Brad, we can see your slides. If you could put them in presentation mode, I think they'll be more easily visible. Down at the bottom right, you'll see the little projector screen. Or up top, too. That works as well. Perfect. And you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, that always helps, doesn't it?
We're in business. Go for it, Brad.
Okay. So thank you all, Valley of the Sun, and thank you, Chris and Tracy. I'm going to very quickly go through this first part because we also have Tim, Terry, and Emma who are in our first cohort in this initiative. So this is a little bit of build reuse. It is a national nonprofit. It's been around about 20 years. As far as it goes, it's the primary organization in the U.S. at the national level supporting deconstruction and reuse and the sector for doing this. So now I need to figure out my advance function. Ironically, I had already planned a little shout out to RMI's work. This was a report that was done in 2023 with the U.S. Green Building Council. And just that reference, I think, to what Chris and Tracy mentioned, there's more than one way to skin this cat. And we want to combine all of these approaches. And if you think about, for example, being more efficient in a structural design in combination with the absolute carbon footprint of a product, you're going to go further. And in this more simplistic idea that reduce, of course, by using things that already exist, we are avoiding both the waste of those materials and the new manufacture. You've probably all seen this slide quite a bit. Environmental product declarations often are compared to nutrition fact labels. And I think it's important to note the primary goal is transparency and legitimate authoritative information upon which to make decisions. It is not necessarily telling you one thing is better than the other. And that is an important question that arises a lot. And in order to do that, there's a more detailed discussion around comparability and so on. But the bottom line is to provide that information to decision makers for their own ability to come up with the best solution. Reuse, it may seem simple to say, well, I'm reusing something. However, in the ISO standards and even in our kind of common thought process, There's more than one way to think about reuse. It is the idea of a secondary material. That is a material which had a first iteration. It does not necessarily mean that it was literally used or installed in a prior application. A lot of the reuse industry depends upon different forms of waste. And so one of the tricky parts is when a product transitions from the product stage to a waste stage. So at this point, we have this little bit of taxonomy here, products which are waste, and simply you could say a byproduct of a construction process. There are unused waste products, so that does require also a little bit of parsing. The clearest definition, it no longer has any value to the original holder. And then urban wood is an interesting case of also a waste product coming from what might be perceived as a virgin product. However, in these terms, it is a waste product being diverted for a product. I did a survey in just a few months ago in May of 2025. I try to do this every year of the industry to see where things are going. And just to note a few things that I do believe the reuse industry is ready to go beyond some of the traditional drivers. This includes a growing interest in green building, not just the fact, but the need for a new demographic of younger customers. And we all read about the idea that the next generation will be more attuned to both knowing more about what they buy and purchase, however, an interest in green building. And then also these important collaborations to expand into larger scale partnerships, which aligns particularly to commercial products. Even asking how the industry expects things to change in about 5 years. Referencing the demographics, the use of more technology, which is very important around information and being able to generate better transparency. Expanding into commercial markets and noting a greater focus on embodied carbon and climate benefits of reuse. I think it's great that ResNet is, to my knowledge, the first time to really look at this embodied carbon and EPDs in the residential sector. So it's really bringing together some of this history that the reuse sector has in residential building with what EPDs have been, at least in the last 15 years, primarily focused on commercial products. So we have a good opportunity to leverage those sides. I love the slide, even though it's not simple, but to say basically what we're doing is a kind of environmental and material energy resource accounting. You are taking in things to make things. You will emit byproducts and waste to the environment. Your goal is to output something useful. All of this depends upon data. So this is what we're currently doing to develop some more data, because that's, I think as Tracy alluded to, really a kind of showstopper when you don't have the data available across the board to create legitimate environmental product declarations or just to make good decision making. So we're going to hear next from 3 of the organizations that are involved currently with build reuse and generating some of what we call LCI data. That is their primary processes that they're undergoing to do what they do and to collect that data that we can utilize to translate into environmental impacts. So I'm not sure who's going to start, but it's Emma, Terry, and Tim from the 3 different groups.
And I think we have roughly queued up that Terry Wiles will speak first, and then Tim Torres, and then Emma. So I think that Terry has now unmuted himself.
Yes, I am all ready to go, I believe.
Super. And Tim and Emma, why don't you unmute in the meantime, and we'll be able to move smoothly. Go for it, Terry.
So my name's Terry Wiles. I am Special Projects Manager for Construction Junction, which is a nonprofit Building Material Reuse Center in Pittsburgh, PA. And it's been quite illuminating to be a part of this project with Brad and the rest of the folks in the cohort, as we start to look at the data that we're collecting. So with Construction Junction, we're basically focusing on three different products. The one you see there where it says wood seating product, we get a lot of church pews that we get in. And over the course of our history, we've done a couple of things with them. One has been to sort of resize them to another bench type product. But where we've taken a lot of this material, it has been to turn it back into basically dimensional lumber. And so in looking at, the amount of waste that gets created in doing that, as well as just sort of looking at our material and going to get the material and bringing it here and the energy involved in pulling that product basically apart has been really interesting. We still believe it's a good use of this product, but it has been interesting. The other thing real quick that I just want to note is that this has really got us to kind of relook at how things come to us. We never really surveyed before on how far people are coming to bring us items, which we sort of needed for especially the wood doors and the toilets. And so that's been sort of eye-opening as well. If you'd have told me our average person was 8 miles away, I would have thought that was high, but in fact, that's where we've pretty much landed. As well as then looking and taking into consideration a little more on how far our trucks, whether they be our deconstruction vehicles and or just our local pickups, how far we go for some of this material. So that's all been really interesting, and it's we just keep kind of going forward and seeing what else we'll get uncovered as we go through the process.
Thank you, Terry. Tim, why don't you take over and give us an update from Stardust?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Torres. I'm Director of Programs at Stardust Building Supply here in Arizona. And yeah, it's been really great working with Brad and learning the proper techniques to figure out what kind of environmental impact our process is making as a business. So we've been tracking all of our deconstruction jobs along with pickups that we're making, and also when people are coming in to donate products to us, we are notating what kind of vehicle they're in and what zip code they're coming from, so we can calculate exactly how much fuel they're using to bring these products to us. My favorite part has probably been sorting through all of the old electrical bills that we have and getting measurements for our processing area to calculate just how much electricity we're using in the process to bring in these materials. But it's been a real pleasure, most of all, working with Brad and learning all of the secrets of his trade. And we hope to be really impactful in this process. It's been awesome.
Thank you, Tim. Emma, I think you're unmuted, and if you can give us a little bit of perspective from Urban Evolutions.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm the sustainability coordinator at Urban Evolutions. We are a wood products manufacturer in Wisconsin, and we've been around for 30 years. And our expertise is really in reclaimed material procurement and product development. So throughout our history, we've been supplying large-scale commercial clients with reclaimed wood. And we have actually, because of this, we have gotten requests for EPDs before, but trying to conduct an EPD on our own was too big of a lift because the product category rules and the methodology hadn't really been developed yet. So it was a huge opportunity, something we're really excited about to be part of this cohort. So we are measuring are 2x lumber that comes from deconstructed homes, and then flooring and millwork products that come from both reclaimed wood from barns and factories and urban wood that Brad mentioned coming from city trees that need to be taken down. Our perspective is a little bit unique because, as I said, our expertise is in procurement. We outsource the majority of our remanufacturing processes. We're blessed to be in a part of the country that has a really strong wood manufacturers network. But it does make this process more complicated for us because I don't have direct control over the machinery and all of the things that we need to track. It's all happening at other companies. And a lot of the vendors that we work for are also part of the Amish community and don't have the same communication methods that we do. So a lot of my work thus far has been figuring out the best ways to communicate and gather this information from our different vendors. I would say we're probably a little bit behind everybody else as far as gathering actual data. But I have started to track some of the easier lower lying fruit and setting up these processes so that we can go to a vendor who is not familiar with any of this terminology or really the sustainable business industry at all. We're setting it up so that we can communicate why it's important and what exactly needs to be done. Hopefully, so this can be replicated in future products that we do and kind of set some examples for other companies in our situation. So it's complicated. It's a big undertaking, but I'm really excited about it. And the vendors that I've worked with so far, they do understand and like why we're doing this and are looking forward to getting the results back.
Super. Thank you, Emma. Brad, let's go ahead and turn it back to you, and I think you can move on to the next section of your presentation deck. For your awareness, it's about 38 minutes after the hour, and if that helps you manage your time so that you can cover everything appropriately and still give us some time for Q&A.
Yeah. Whoops. Okay, so, and just to note, that's Emma's comments, it's a very important thought about the supply chains of any products and the tiers that go on. I mean, we're trying to dig into, no matter what you're doing, that upstream of how products come together from many sources potentially. And that's always been one of the complications. So if you can see the slide, I think so maybe bringing it back home to homes, a little bit of additional stuff here. Last year, I did a survey through the Home Innovations Research Labs. This was part of a project to create a salvage app for helping people identify and communicate around potentially salvageable materials. And before you can do anything like that, it is important to know who and what goes on, the lay of the land, where to perhaps start. So the first idea is that this is single family home builders primarily. These are members of the National Association of Home Builders. We all know there are hundreds of thousands of home builders in the US. Traditionally, reuse has been pretty suited or in the residential sector. So to first understand what kind of homes and the sort of ratios of homes that are being built. The next thing was, I think, pretty interesting, and maybe I would ask people to think if this jives with their own experiences. So basically, more products are salvaged from renovations than are typically on a kind of percentage of response than from demolition. So that's sort of suggesting around what happens in renovations and the ability to do salvage and how it might align when you're doing a renovation. And, naturally need to have more careful selective work. Also interesting then on the flip side that salvage products were more used in renovation projects than were used in new construction. So That's another interesting thing to think about, why that is and what kind of situations might go on, maybe how to change some of that. I don't think it would be any news to the people who do this about what the most common obstacles are. These have really not changed in the 30 years that I've been part of this. How salvage might affect the project schedule, perceive it costs more because labor is usually more expensive than disposal. The raw logistical issues, those have never really changed. The one that's most interesting to me is on the far right, the little red one, which is that only 2.5% of the respondents said they had never heard of or were completely unaware of the idea of salvage. So to basically say 97.5% of these respondents were aware of the idea of salvaging products. So we just need to grow that 97% to become the 97% of salvaging of projects, them back in their projects. I don't think it would be any surprise to say that people did respond around interesting aesthetic qualities of reclaimed products, potential for cost savings, and avoidance of disposal. Again, I'm noting, I really appreciate here that, so these are home builders. They're under a lot of stress. They have to make money. They need to meet codes. They need to meet their clients' needs. But local community benefit is not an insignificant thing in their minds. And I think that's really important to recognize that any business person is still part of a community. So what are the most commonly salvaged materials from demolitions? Maybe not surprising. So it helps inform us to know where we should put efforts. Cabinets, interior doors, appliances, a little surprising to me, but it does make a lot of sense. These are very high value items. This is not saying what they are potentially putting back to use. Where did these products go? So I think also pointing to where and how to create these ecosystems. A lot of homeowners may actually be keeping the products that are coming out of the work. The contractors may also be keeping some of these products or even giving them away. And then you see also donating to nonprofit organizations. So there is a very strong aspect of really a very close loop of informal reuse. My question would be, well, how many of those homeowners are actually eventually still building those, using those products? That there still is an outlet or second use that if they don't use them, they can go to that other kind of channel. So noting the salvage that takes place, what are people putting back? So you see that appliances don't even appear except onto the very far right of high value reclamation, but in this more formal contractor segment, they are not necessarily using those themselves. So those are going to different kinds of markets. And I don't think it would be a surprise when noting the aesthetic and kind of quality and value of appearances and so on, that architectural interest is very important. So knowing that and how perhaps to upcycle and remanufacture can be a great pathway for encouraging. And then you can see lighting fixtures, brick and stone, not quite the same or exactly aligning to what people are taking out. So I think to think about what people might take out of projects and what they might use are two different aspects. And a very positive note that what people do need to rely on is somebody to sell them the product and to go through that supply chain of a vendor who can help them with the quantities, the quality, the certainty that it's all in one place, the brick and mortar. Still, in spite of all the ideas about online and e-commerce, that brick and mortar is still the dominant pathway or channel of acquiring reclaimed products, at least in this sector of homeowner reuse. And so on the other side of that, for us, on the side of trying to establish standards and make good environmental information known, we do have that pathway to point to. It's not the entire US population that we have to reach. We can reach them through the reuse stores and outlets. So thank you very much, and I hope there's still some time for Q&A amongst a lot of information that we just received.
Super. Thank you very much, Brad. Okay, let's go ahead and if we can stop your share, and we will open things up so that we are able to take some questions. And we did have a few, I believe, that came in the chat. So we'll go ahead and start with those as folks come up with others. When you have questions, please feel free to either use the Zoom virtual hand raise feature. Go ahead and put it in the chat. There's too many people to see on a screen, so I won't necessarily see your hands if you're just doing it with a physical hand, but we'll find a way to work it through. Going back over to the questions in the chat, Allison Allen had asked a question back in the context of Chris and Tracy's presentation about whether there is a standard like ResNet 1550 for consumer products. And why don't you guys go ahead and unmute yourselves? And we'll still leave this so that whoever is speaking will be large on the screen. So Chris or Tracy, can you respond to Allison's question?
I guess in terms of consumer products, that's pretty broad, so I'm not exactly sure. Environmental product declarations do exist for, product categories outside of buildings. I'm a lot less familiar with them outside that context. But it is the sort of the standards for making an EPD exist for any kind of product. But I haven't done a lot of looking at what non-building EPDs are actually out there and available.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Natasha Jeremic, and I hope I'm not slaughtering your name, had asked a question, and there was some follow-up conversation about it in the chat, so I'm not sure if either Natasha or the folks who responded want to comment on it. But it was, you mentioned that reprocessing and regrading recovered materials has a significantly lower environmental impact than producing new materials, and Natasha was looking for references or studies to support that. And there was feedback that Tracy and Chris had shared that there is information that they can share afterwards, but I didn't know if any of the three of you had any comments that you wanted to make on that. Oh, and I see
Sure.
Ryan had also chimed in. So any of you want to share anything on that one?
Sure, Kathy. I happy to share. So if you get in touch with me by email, I am happy to share with you the various sources that we looked into and trying to get some data for that. And what we thought would have been a pretty simple, straightforward factor, like Chris was alluding to, was coming from a variety of sources that also reported a variety of different information with different scopes and focuses. So Natasha, some of those were EPDs of reused materials. Some of those were studies, very specific studies on wood flooring. And some of them were were studies on a project level. So there was various scales and scopes of what was included, and also various outputs too. For example, some reported the energy that was required, that was compared versus the carbon emissions that were compared. So I'm happy to send you what I have. I'm sure it overlaps with things that you've seen as well, but if it supports your research in this space, you can get in touch and I can share that with you.
Okay.
Thanks.
And if there is anything, Tracy, that comes to mind that you want to include links to when we send out the recording link, we could also include them there if that's a topic that folks are interested in. So, okay.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just add to what Tracy said. It depends a lot on the product type, right? There are certain products that have really high emissions, things that either require, kilning, baking, or where there are, large kind of chemical emissions when the virgin product is made that the reused product doesn't have. So brick is a great example. You know, firing brick the first time has a lot of emissions. Processing and moving reused brick is likely to be a lot lower than that. When it comes to things like wood, where the initial emissions have to do with milling, planing, you know, those sorts of things, and the reused ones also have to do with that. It varies a lot. So, but like product type by product type, you can see quite a spread between, virgin emissions and reused ones.
Super. And
Yeah.
Natasha, go ahead. I see you raised your hand, and please go on.
Sure, yeah. Thank you both, Tracy and Chris. Yeah, and Tracy, I am specifically looking at wood because that's what our research is in. So we do have at least 2 projects right now where we're looking at different impacts of reusing lumber and different wood products, and specifically looking at the socio-environmental impacts. And so I just want to make sure we have all the research that's out there. So I will shoot you an email so that we can get aligned. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Karen Ashike had a question for Brad about what reused materials could actually be used for, suggesting some questions about balconies, rebar, wood that could be replaced by those to stop water damage. Also questions about plastic or bamboo or what reused products for deck or floor of the balcony.
So you raise an interesting question about the durability and lifespan of any product. So when we think about reuse, I mean, it is extending the life of a product that may have already had a life. And so that's one of the complexities of how much more life will it have. It's already maybe doing one of those functions, like an exterior application, a balcony, cladding, whatever it could be. As an architect, many products can last a very long time based on the design. So not allowing them to retain water, be soaked, to rot. There are wood buildings that have lasted 1,000 years because the lumber is protected. So any product could potentially be reclaimed and reused. It is not only the properties of the material, it is also how you design the application and allow it to last a long time in the way that you treat its installation and use. So I'm sorry I'm not giving you a precise product type, but could reuse anything you want. And it's no more than just extending the life of a product beyond what it may have had. And many products are not disposed of because they literally fell apart or were obsolete. They were taken out because somebody just wanted to change something and they could have a perfectly good life remaining.
If I may, Brad, I'm going to step in here. Maybe part of what Karen is going for is the question that ties into what building codes permit things to be used for, which is a bigger topic. And I know we had Gary and Sika in the call, who is moving some things forward and has actually presented to this group before about getting reused building materials included in building codes for more significant and substantive use. So I think it's a bigger topic, but Gary, and I don't know if you are available and if you want to unmute yourself and make any comment on that.
Hi, Kathy. This is Gary. And can you hear me okay?
We can, but we can't see you. So it'd be great if you turn your camera on too.
Oh, okay, perfect. Hi, everybody. Thank you so
Okay.
much. It's been an amazing presentation. The topic, as Kathy mentioned, on reused materials in the building code, specifically salvage lumber, is large. Since we're at almost the end of our time here, I would invite anybody with follow-up questions to email me and I can connect directly with you. And then Kathy, maybe we could work together for a future presentation if that sounds good. Maybe like a panel. Just throwing that out there. What do you think?
Super. Because I know we will want to have an update from you on progress on the comment sections as things have been moving forward with your efforts. Okay.
Would love
Great.
to. Thank
But
you.
just letting folks know that that is something that is also in the works, where progress is continuing and where we want to keep an eye on it to make sure everybody's aware of that. Okay, thanks, Garion. Okay, I see that there was a conversation back and forth between Anna Perks and Emma about whether or not there were currently retail warehouses that include EPDs with their material sales. I don't know if either of you wanted to add anything to that. And then Chris, I'll give a second in case those folks want to unmute. Perhaps not. They're not. Okay. Chris, you had added a comment about a note regarding the 1550 standard about the emissions from cabinetry, trim, and appliances not being counted right now. Is there anything further you wanted to elaborate on that, Chris?
No, it was just really interesting to see those results from Brad, and those were some categories of products that didn't end up getting included in the 1550 standard. Either things that were excluded were either because there wasn't enough data or because the overall contribution to the carbon footprint of a home was small, and or a combination of those. So it was just interesting to see that, we really wanted to encourage reuse with the standard, but actually, the three leading categories of products that do end up in homes from through reuse aren't actually captured anyway. But I don't want to talk any longer because I see Ryan is there with his hand up too. So
yes, and Ryan, I see you've unmuted yourself, which is great. Please go ahead with what you wanted to share.
Yeah, thanks. Great session. I just wanted to add briefly to the building code discussion about reused materials that there is a effort to look into this in Canada. I'm from Toronto, and one of the ways that they're looking right now at to include some of these materials is not maybe there's two parts. I was going to say not only looking at the building code itself, but also looking at the material specific codes and standards. So, for example, the brick code, to update the brick code on how to use salvage brick in the brick code, so that when the when the building code points to the brick code, the salvage material is already covered by that material specific code. So just wanted to say there's also that additional piece that people might be interested in looking at.
That's super helpful, Ryan. And it might be great to have some follow-up conversation about that to find a way to bring broader awareness to it. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat or any other hand raises. We have another minute or so left in case there are any further questions. But if there are not, I'd like to thank all of our presenters as well as all of our guest commentators who shared their experiences about the EPD
Kathy,
cohort.
got a hand.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah. I have a quick question. I think it was Brad mentioned some of the technologies that are needed to move this forward. What comes to mind when we talk about technologies and how that could be part of the solution or part of the future of this?
In 30 seconds.
go for it, Brad.
There are people who run Restore. You should ask them. I look at this in a broader way. I think the largest problem is the cataloging. It's not that we need networks to make the transactions, but I think being able to catalog, even if you are illustrating a product that brings someone to the brick and mortar store, is probably a really important need. You're not necessary to try to sell everything directly e-commerce. However, I think what a lot of the brick and mortar can gain by is just a better way to display their wares, if I can put it that way.
Okay. Thank you. We are out of time. Thank you again to all of our guests, also all of the folks who spoke today. Please take a moment and respond to the survey as we exit the meeting. We hope we'll see you again at next month's session. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.